In March 2016, Mitt Romney, who was then a private citizen, gave a speech warning about the danger to the Republican Party of nominating Donald Trump. This was the bit of that speech that always sort of stood out to me. Let me quote from it. Mr. Trump is directing our anger for less than noble purposes. He creates scapegoats of Muslims and Mexican immigrants. He calls for the use of torture. He calls for killing the innocent children and family members of terrorists. He cheers assaults on protesters. He applauds the prospects of twisting the Constitution to limit First Amendment freedom of the press. This is the very brand of anger that has led other nations into the abyss. Here's what I know. Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. Romney's purpose in that speech was very clear. The nomination was trending toward Trump. As the party's 2012 presidential nominee, Romney felt it was his job to stand in the way of that, forcing Republicans to think long and hard about what they were doing and why they were doing it. He was frank in his assessment of what acquiescing to Trump as the nominee would likely mean for not just his party, but the country. Again, here's Romney. If we Republicans choose Donald Trump as our nominee, the prospects for a safe and prosperous future are greatly diminished. I was thinking of that speech when I heard the news this week that Romney would not be running for another term in the Senate come 2024. Ever since that 2016 speech, Romney has been one of the only, and certainly one of the most high-profile, critics of Trump within the GOP. He proved that you could get elected. He won a Senate seat in Utah in 2018, in spite of having those sorts of views. He was, for me, what was left of the normie wing of the Republican Party as it battled for its very existence against the existential threat of Trump's national populism. In January 2019, so 2 full years before the January 6th riot, Romney had already rendered judgment on Trump's presidency and found it wanting. Here's what he wrote in an op-ed in the Washington Post at that time. It is well known that Donald Trump was not my choice for the Republican presidential nomination. After he became the nominee, I hoped his campaign would refrain from resentment and name-calling. It did not. When he won the election, I hoped he would rise to the occasion. His early appointments of Rex Tillerson, Jeff Sessions, Nikki Haley, Gary Cohn, H.R. McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis were encouraging. But on balance, his conduct over the past 2 years, particularly his actions last month, is evidence that the president has not risen to the mantle of the office. That was Romney in 2019. He put his vote where his mouth was, to his credit. Romney was the only Republican senator to vote to convict Trump in both of his Senate impeachment trials. Doing so, though, clearly put him in political peril, even in Utah, which had been among the red states most resistant to Trump's appeals over the years. And while Romney insisted this week that electoral concerns were no factor in his decision, I guess I find that a little bit hard to believe. Romney, who's a student of history, likely remembers well 2010, when 3-term Republican Utah Senator Bob Bennett lost badly in a fight for the nomination at the state party convention. Bennett was cast as insufficiently conservative and part of the Washington establishment, which is exactly what they would say about Romney. And there's just no way Romney, a hugely successful businessman, a decorated political candidate, wanted to go out that way. And he had to know that because of his anti-Trump stance within the party, he would face a real fight for the Republican nomination come 2024. But I actually don't think political considerations were the main reason that Romney decided to step aside. I think he realized at some point over the last few years that the fight he had started against Trump all those years ago for control of the Republican Party was really and truly now lost. Read this from the Romney retire story in the Washington Post, which broke the news. Listen to this. Asked about the 2024 presidential election, Romney said he would have liked to help someone other than Trump become the nominee, but, quote, that apparently isn't going to happen. He added, quote, I doubt my support will mean anything positive to any of the candidates at the finish line. I'm not looking to get involved in that. The story went on to say this. Romney noted that 3 of the contenders for the Republican nomination, Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, all speak the language of the MAGA, Make America Great Again, wing of the Republican Party, and together account for the overwhelming majority of support, with Trump far ahead of the others, which, if you look at the polling, is exactly right. The populist candidates, that's Trump, DeSantis, and Ramaswamy, are currently winning roughly 3/4 of the vote in the Republican primary. 3/4. And it's not just that. With few notable exceptions, the Republican stalwarts of the anti-Trump movement of 5 years ago, who were in elected office, that's Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, Wyoming's Liz Cheney, Illinois' Adam Kinzinger, etc., have been run out, forced to decide between retiring or losing badly in a primary. There is simply no home in the GOP for people who believe that Trump's version of populism is a far cry from conservative values and who are willing to say that sort of thing publicly. Romney was, in many ways, the last man standing, a link back to a Republican Party built around policy rather than personality. He was the final sentinel guarding the gate of old school conservatism. So what? Romney's retirement is best understood as the dying embers of the last flickering fires of resistance to Trumpian populism within the Republican Party. Although Romney was the Republican presidential nominee just over a decade ago, the party with which he affiliates is now virtually unrecognizable from what it was when he led it. Romney, in his mid-70s, and after a lengthy career running for and in public service, decided to stop fighting the impossible odds he was facing. It's hard to blame him.